It be like, okay, deep breath. A little Mary Jane on my brain when I swim to the deep end. Hard to grow when you seedless. You settle for a free spin. See, I came with allegiance, and my defense a prevent. I put foot to the cement. Blue rich for the weekend. Want a clip, better stream it. Cause we gone for the evening. God damn it, no capping, stop bobbing and weaving. You just lost in your demons. Sorta blind, never seasoned. Another lost little heathen. Only begging for freedom, but he don't know the meaning. He gon' take it and leave it. Are we even, Steven, when you reach for the deacon? What we don't do is pretend, nigga. I stay woke on you sleeping niggas. Never meet or greet them niggas. We the street sweep them niggas. Catch me on the deep end, nigga. Y'all put shame on it. I'ma put my pain on it. Pour champagne on it. Throw a campaign for it. Damn what you say, homie. Yo, I was with the 40s drinking water. Had to go to Nonchalant Corner. Pulled up in the new brown bomber. Couldn't step on me, hard lava. Wayne, what you say? I got him. Sniper on the roof, I spot him. Grab another beat, why bother? Hasselhoff, me, not rider. Just rolled the weed, got a lot of it. Got your punk bitch on the side. Not my steez, no vaccine. Told them fiends, hit that acting, then we lean. Ain't no if or in between. Yeah, we poppin' like hot grease. We say fuck, but we don't sleep. Tell them fools that hell is deep. If you want a piece of some piece, it be like, okay, no pain. Take it all down with some Kool-Aid. Wrap it all up for a new day. Gotta cut ties with the loose strings. Want a different story with a blank page. Want a new ride just to switch lanes. Tell me right now for the whole page. Smoke it all fades away. So amazing, I was on like 2 strips of bacon. We was at a hot new creation. Once upon a time I was graceful. Your persona, I was on one. I was coffee, the donut. I'm sorry my life was the hold up. I'm a soldier, so I pack and I roll up. There was karma the cobra, so hard to think when it's over. Better having thoughts, never sober. Regrets on my shoulder, the devil in my holster. Man, a brother just feel like ghosting nowadays. Feels like in life I'm an hour late. Wanted you around, but you couldn't stay. Walk right out of heaven gate with the combination to the safe. Oh, for goodness sake, had to light a new script, had to load a new clip. I was sick of fate. Yo, back on the chase or escape, whatever I gotta say to relate. Wrong, gotta take it to the face. Put it in the oven, let it bake. Just another quarter in the lake. Maybe it was fate. Let him emanate. Let me elevate, y'all.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into Below the Noise, a safe space for artists to talk their creative process while showcasing their work in a hybrid interview performance setting. Hosted by Alex RIDL, myself, Colin Cassard, and our special guest interviewer, Mittens, here. We want to thank you for tuning in. As we've been doing this here for a little bit, this is episode 10, we figured it's about time we got you introduced to my co-host and the brainfather of Below the Noise, super producer Alex RIDL. Originally from the Bay Area, you can find him producing a multitude of genres under a plethora of aliases in his studio here in Portland. Hello again, sir.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. Good to see you.
Fantastic. Good to see you too.
Yeah.
Yep, and we got a little mitzvah here. You know, she's just enjoying life.
Such a wonderful cat.
She's a good kitty. So this first track that we played was Amazing by Greg G, right?
Yep.
And you remixed it. So this is not the original take on the song.
This is not the original take on the song. The original's not out. I was in the process of mixing and mastering it for him. Okay. I recorded the vocals as well. And partway through doing the mix job, got a little distracted and ended up flipping a new new beat for it. Felt right.
Nice.
Felt right. And I'm sort of in the background working towards an EP of this sort of style of things with Greg.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you, how did this remix come about? But so you just kind of got the inspiration in hearing the original and wanted to drive it into a new direction?
I was literally mid-mix, and I was like sitting there, and I sort of looked at the tempo of the track and was like, man, this sort of fits right into the higher end of slumpy dance tempo. And so I don't really have to like warp anything or really cut up vocals or anything like that. So it just felt like a kind of, it made sense to do, since it was so one-to-one in terms of tempo and like the ability to sort of just bring the multi-tracks over into a new session. So I did. I think originally I was going to do some sort of like processing on maybe the vocals or something like that, and I was going to do them in a new session, to sort of like keep things organized and cut down on latency. Maybe I was going to lay in a new instrument or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. Something brought me to a new session in the existing sort of realm of mixing the song, and yeah, it was just sort of like, well, what would happen if we just did some of this?
So when you're remixing a song like the original, are you just taking the vocals and putting an entirely new instrumental track behind it, or are you taking aspects from the instrumental track and flipping them in different ways?
Well, it sort of depends. If I occasionally have the opportunity to remix stuff that I'm mixing for people, and so often that'll come along with like multi-tracks of the beat itself, in which case I can pull out individual instruments, individual elements. In this particular case, the beat was just a stereo file. So I did pull an element from it. The guitar part that you hear in the beginning and in some of the breakdowns is a core element of the original beat. So I wanted to keep that kind of vibe and keep the same like kind of harmonic structure, roughly, chord changes. Yep. I did, sort of alter them as it moves into the other sections of the song to simplify it down a little bit and create like moments of change as it goes back into the full chord progression. But in this one, that's the only element that's brought over from the original, aside from the vocals. Okay.
Do you enjoy that style more, or do you enjoy it when it's a multi-track? And I guess, it depends on the song, right?
Yeah, totally depends on the song. Sometimes I really like even going for a super fresh slate. There are times when I will hunt out, if I'm just sort of remixing for the fun of it, say I'm remixing a song on the radio or whatever it may be, just as like practice. Sometimes I will go so far as to seek out the a cappella without having ever heard the original song. And I don't listen to like a ton of music that's on the radio necessarily. I do as sort of a part of staying up to date with the music of the world, but it's not sort of my primary listening outlet. So there are songs that I can sort of find a cappellas that pop up on the internet that I don't know the original song. And so that can be a really fun exercise where it's like, okay, well, really all you have here is some sort of timing that you can, like loose structure of verses and choruses, and then you have a key that the song is in, essentially. And even that, can sort of shift around depending on what approach you take to it. So that can be a really fun way to do it, because you're not at all really trying to reference the original track. But it is sometimes fun to go the other direction as well. Like in this, like those chord changes, that guitar part is very much a part of like what sparked a direction for the remix. So, in a kind of long-winded answer to your question, I would say, I enjoy doing both of them. They just sort of work different muscles.
Yeah. So how did you and Greg get to collaborating creatively?
Oh man. It's probably been like 20 years.
Okay.
Greg is perhaps my oldest musical collaborator. We met each other growing up in Oakland, Berkeley, as teenagers in high school, just sort of kicking it at the local BART station. It's the public transit train. And we would sort of cut class and, smoke weed and be truants and shitty kids. And we would always gather at the BART station, and you could just almost always find Greg, like, either himself banging on a trash can or somebody else banging on a trash can, and he would just freestyle for hours, like, felt like hours. And, like, obviously, you understand as someone who's in the hip-hop scene, like, freestyling is not a necessarily, like, unique thing that happens, like ciphers go down all the time, but there was just always something about Greg in that it wasn't your normal sort of like battle freestyles, that kind of thing. It was just this intense like stream of consciousness narrative. Guy walking down the street, whatever, just describing the people in the crowd, but it was always just so seamless and with such impeccable style and like coolness to it. And he would just like sit there and people would call out different rappers, like, E40, and he'd switch his flow up and like perfectly emulate the sort of cadence of E40's flows. Oh, give us DMX, whatever. And this was just how we hung out, and it was just us kicking it like that. And so ultimately when I got into producing and especially engineering, it's like I set my first studio up in the basement of a house in Ghost Town in West Oakland, and Greg was there from day one recording, and we've been really close friends ever since, and have done a lot of music together, a lot of projects. He's sort of a prominent feature in my musical life.
Nice.
And one of my dearest friends.
Yeah. There is something that speaks of like, there's something about MCs that can freestyle in that stream of consciousness style. It's not that many MCs can do it. More often than not, you have people that are kind of falling back on like some of the same rhyme schemes or battling or stuff like that. But I remember the first time I saw Supernatural live, and
sorry,
we'll cut that. And I remember the first time I saw Supernatural live was actually in San Francisco, and his ability, he had the whole crowd like hold up a bunch of items. And he was able to like stitch together a story with just all these things after seeing it for the first time, and like create this whole journey. And if you're there with the person and can like really follow along, it's like truly, I don't know, like, I was going to say it's like truly a work of art, but it's like almost magical in the sense that, it's just, there's nothing really like it. It's like seeing live music or something like that. There's just this energy that gets captured when people are able to do those kind of things and really tap into the moment and the creativity of the moment.
Absolutely. And I think that there's something sort of intrinsically captivating in the fact that when someone is sitting there and in essence narrating the things that are happening around you, like it's hard not to relate to what it is that they're saying, because they are describing what you are experiencing in the moment. And so it creates a sort of direct connection between the lyrics and the person who's listening to them, because it's like he might start rapping about you or about the guy next to you, or like that random person walking across the street, or like this store that's got discount gelato for the day. You know what I mean? Like whatever,
exactly, yeah.
Whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was going to ask about, you said you've been collaborating with Greg for such a long time. Do you have any favorite tracks that the listening audience can go seek out that are up on your Spotify or Bandcamp or anything like that?
Yeah.
That specifically, I guess, involve Greg as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I really like his voice. His flow is impeccable. He's
absolutely yeah. There is a song that I released under an alias of mine, Edison Watts, which is sort of a place that I put certain avenues of dance music, and it's called Shake It Loose.
Okay.
And it is with Greg and a fantastic singer from the Bay Area, Atosa. That one's awesome. I believe that is also... you can find that on Greg's Spotify and whatnot. That's Greg G, G-E-E.
Sweet.
That one's one of my favorites because it's like Greg has such a versatile style that, you know, if you go and seek out his music, you'll hear a lot of things in between, you know, sort of classic, old school, golden era hip hop, all the way to kind of more contemporary, like trap soul kind of stuff. And this particular one is sort of sample driven, kind of dusty disco inspired dance music, kind of soul dance music. And so it's just a different side of Greg yet again, you know, and he can pretty much just sort of fit on anything. And as is evidence to that, you know, you could also find him, there's another double single that him and I put out, myself under the name Maxwellcutty, with Greg G, and that's where I typically produce more sort of a little bit more aggressive house, bass heavy house music. And so even on that's like a totally contemporary style, like total, like at the rave type thing. Greg still just fits in perfectly, you know, and he just totally steals the show. So I would say those ones are interesting tracks with him because they just sort of showcase his versatility as an artist.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's get into the second song here. This one's called Choose One, and it is a flip of a D-Caps song, and they're a producer duo from Sao Paulo.
They are,
correct?
Yeah.
So how did you discover the original song and,
Yeah.
stumble into flipping it?
I have in my life played a lot of Brazilian music. It's something that I've had the great opportunity to do as a bass player, as an instrumentalist. Some of my dear friends back in the Bay Area have really, you know, introduced me to a whole world of Brazilian music, both classic and some contemporary as well. And so there's a whole genre of music down there that's very popular right now. It's called baile funk. And it's sort of, in essence, almost the Brazilian answer to American trap music, and sort of contemporary rap, in that it features those sort of like running hi-hats and a lot of 808s and stuff like that. But because it's Brazilian, there's always this sort of, it's informed by a really awesome understanding of percussion and of, you know, that sort of like harmony and melody. So when I heard this original song, I was sort of on a kick, just absorbing a lot of contemporary baile funk. I've been working on a series of music that is sort of dance flips of both classic and contemporary Brazilian music. So this was kind of, I came upon the original in the midst of sort of doing explorative research for that vein in that project. And it's an awesome track. I just love that piano sample, that like keyboard sample that comes in, and the chord choices, and just like something about it felt like it just had all this room for both like spaciousness and openness, but all these little like percussive elements, and to really lean into, you know, my own understanding of Brazilian percussion. So, you know, I sort of took it and stripped it back. It was originally more of like a trap sort of half tempo kind of thing. And, you know, just redid much of the percussion, you know, sort of brought in new chordal elements, bass elements, that kind of thing. And, you know, I didn't do a ton to change the structure. I didn't really chop it up. I guess less of a flip and more of a kind of rework or an edit, whatever the terminology you want to use is. But yeah, I really love how this one came out, and there will be, you know, sort of more in this vein. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Choose one. right, so this one, as you were mentioning before we jumped into the song, is a baile funk. And I've heard you mention your familiarity with Brazilian music in the past, and I've always been curious, what was your intro into the world, the musical world of Brazil? Like you mentioned that you had some friends that exposed you to it in the Bay Area, but how did you get into like playing so much of it? And
so when I was in sort of beginning of high school, end of middle school, I started studying jazz guitar. And growing up, my family always listened to a lot of, not necessarily Brazilian music, but a lot of just world music at large. And it's like I grew up with a lot of salsa and a lot of like cumbia and reggae especially. And so when I started studying jazz guitar, I always sort of had an interest in these other styles of music as well. And I ultimately was led to a guitar teacher in the Bay Area, and he specialized in Brazilian music and South American classical music. So I spent a little bit of time studying like Venezuelan classical music on guitar, which led into sort of studying like bossa nova kind of stuff also on, solo classical guitar, which then sort of led into more samba kind of things. And then I sort of like took a little deviation from that for a while and was sort of doing other things in life. And one day, one of my close friends, a guy named Dave Eagle, who's an amazing percussionist down in Oakland, he called me up and he was like, "Hey, I've got this guy from Mozambique, like he needs a bass player." And I'm like, "Well, all right, I'm not really a bass player, but like, yeah, I own a bass, like I can make this happen." So I ended up starting to play with that guy and Dave, just in a little trio setting. And we played a small show that was a fundraiser benefit for Haiti. This was around the time when the earthquake happened down there. And at that show was another band, a guy led by this guy named Mystic Man, who was a dude from Haiti. And he played sort of Haitian, compa, and world beat music. So he saw me play with Dave, and the other gentleman's name, excuse me, it escapes me. It's been a lot of years, and I've smoked a lot of weed since then. But so this guy, Mystic Man, saw me perform at this benefit and was like, "Hey, I need a bass player for my band. Like, what's up? You want to come play bass for my band?" And it's like, well, shit, again, not really a bass player, but sure, why not? Like, let's do it. So that got me into playing a lot of Haitian music, a lot of compa, a lot of like world beat, like West African high life, Afrobeat, that kind of stuff. So from there, Dave had a friend. Dave also played in that group with me, ultimately. And from there, Dave had a friend, this guy, Andrew McCleary, who now is one of my absolute closest friends, like a brother to me. But at the time, he was, playing music with Dave, whatever, and was doing a recording session and needed a bass player to come in and sit in on the recording session. So he spent a long time living in Brazil. He's from the Bay Area, but he spent a long time living in Brazil and is married to a Brazilian woman. They have a kid together. They sort of go back and forth between Brazil and America. So in this random recording session with this guy that I had never met before, we started playing some tunes, and he started showing me like Brazilian music from that perspective, not from the like classical guitar sort of angle. And I ended up continuing to play with him. We actually formed a band that day, first day meeting him. So then I ended up playing music with him and an assortment of other folks in the Bay Area for the next, 4 or 5 years while still playing in these other bands. And that was what really gave me my, lessons on Brazilian music, because we played all sorts of stuff. And Andrew has a encyclopedic level of knowledge about specifically Brazilian music, but world music at large. You remember a couple back at the beginning of us doing this show, we had Wisdom on, right? And the way that he was talking about the different artists on the vinyl, it's like, it reminded me of Andrew in just, calling all these artists. Oh, and this guy played with this guy, and this, right? So yeah, I mean, that was really, I spent years doing that with him and playing all sorts of different kinds of Brazilian music, and it just kind of stuck with me. And it's one of my favorite kinds of music to listen to perform. It definitely, those influences come into the music that I make in a lot of different ways. Yeah, that was my journey from kid in Berkeley listening to hip hop to Brazilian music.
Well, I mean, as we mentioned before, you have so many different aliases. I mean, you were playing classical guitar once upon a time, kind of got thrust into the role as a bassist. You're clearly a multi-instrumentalist. Do you have any like skills or specifically musical skills or instruments that you're looking to add to your tool belt?
Yeah, I'm a shitty drummer.
Okay.
Yeah. Like in terms of playing the trap set, like playing a real drum set, like obviously I can program and sequence drums, and I can even sort of fake it with hi-hat and snare if I sequence the kick drum, but I don't have that limb independence that drummers have, and that's a hill that I've wanted to climb for a long time, but it takes a lot of discipline to become good at drums. And as of such, I have not opted to sort of like put that time and energy and effort into, playing an acoustic drum kit. Yeah. So that's definitely one that I would like to get more under my skin at some point. But, other than that, piano, it's like always an endless journey, because piano is probably the thing I use the most in producing for other people. I play a lot of bass, but, piano, synthesizers, all of that stuff. So ever becoming more proficient in that is a lifelong goal.
Totally. Going back to the aliases, you mentioned earlier, Maxwell Cutty, Edison Watts. We've got, obviously RIDL, your main producer name, the Waterbed Society. I mean, those are the only four that I can think of off the top of my head, but do you ever get exhausted trying to maintain so many brands? And I know that like part of the reason that you've created so many brands is because you make so many different types of music and you can't put it all into one space. But sometimes when I think about that, I'm like, I can barely, keep one going. So
yeah, I mean, the realistic answer is that I don't keep all of them going, and that trying to, if I were legitimately trying to, build a fan base and be a professional performing musician exclusively, I would probably kill myself from exhaustion trying to maintain that many things at an equal level of energy. They serve different purposes, and I spend different amounts of attention on each of them depending on sort of what the purpose is. Like, RIDL tends to be my kind of catch-all as both a producer and an engineer, and more so in the sort of hip hop and soul realms. So that's kind of like me. That's my last name. That's where most people sort of know me from. It's where I do the most collaborative work with people, like I said, both in sort of beat making style of producing and also traditional producing and composing and songwriting and that kind of stuff. And then Maxwell Cutty, like I also have a love for banging dance music, like love me some house music. It's sort of maybe less and less as time goes on, but it's a little bit antithetical from the music that I make as RIDL. And I have found that often people who really like one aren't necessarily, it's not that they don't like the other one, but they don't necessarily want it mixed together. They are also different sides of my artistic self. Maxwell Cutty is not RIDL, and RIDL is not Maxwell Cutty. I don't feel the same when I produce them. They come from different parts of my being, so to speak. So those are the two that I really, sort of focus on because that's where the lion's share of my work is. But, you mentioned the Waterbed Society, right? And it's like the Waterbed Society, I put no energy into maintaining a brand around. It's just a vanity project, for lack of a better term. But that was just like, I had a concept and was just like, hey, what would happen if I wrote a record of a band that exists ambiguously in the year 1983? And what if I was every member of the band except for the singer? And what if I made lives for each of these people? So like they've all got names and personas and musical influences and gear that they own. And, you know, so when I sit down to write music as that, it's like, okay, I'm writing the bass part. Like, you know, I'm Eric Leaf, bass player now, and this is the music I listen to, and okay. So that was just sort of a creative exercise, and it's out there, and the music comes out, and I slowly release songs there from a sort of chunk that I have. Actually, also working with Andrew McCleary, the guy who got me into the Brazilian music. He did me the kindness of singing on that project for me. So yeah, you know, they serve different functions, and Edison Watts is sort of a similar thing. It's like dance music that's a little too dancey to be in the RIDL camp and not quite dancey enough to be in the Maxwell Cutty camp. So
I hear that. And I mean, it as you were describing it, it almost sounds like the idea of the Waterbed Society is like you are going into like an acting role as you're getting ready to perform, you know, the bass or the keys or, you know, whatever. And so you...
Method producing.
Exactly. Yeah, so I've never heard that before. I mean, I know that there are people out there, but I can't think of any specific examples off the top of the head, but I really enjoy that conceptually, you know, and I feel like you can do something that you might not be able to do otherwise because you're going to be pushing yourself in different directions.
I mean, it was definitely an interesting endeavor. It was like, all right, I'm not going to use any sounds that didn't exist in 1983. And I'm not going to include any musical influences that didn't exist in 1983. You know what I mean? And so in giving each of the band members their own personalities and backstories, yeah, it's like it's method producing. And so, you know, I wouldn't produce everything I do that way, but I think it's a good exercise to, you know, help to remind yourself to get out of your own way, your own head, you know, be someone different for a moment and write music from a different perspective.
Yeah, and you're essentially establishing creative parameters to essentially create in. And, you know, as we've talked about with a multitude of guests over a bunch of different episodes, creative parameters and boundaries can be extremely invigorating.
Absolutely.
You know, or inspiring. So.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get into this next song, though. We don't have a name for it. This one's simply untitled.
It is.
But what do you want to tell the audience about this before you get into it?
A couple months ago, I was asked to play at a silent disco here in Portland called Heartbeat Silent Disco. Shout out to Kimba, who runs that. Super dope DJ producer out here and proprietor of a bitchin' silent disco setup. So he asked me to come out and play, and, you know, I sort of maybe slightly misrepresented myself as having a deeper catalog of sort of more funk-driven music than I was necessarily prepared to go out and play. And, you know, he generally books DJs to come out and play, but I have, like, I don't know, some sort of mental block around, like, either I'm playing, like, all other people's music and I'm like DJing, or I'm performing and I want to only play original music. And so, and I don't usually really mix the two together because they're kind of like, oh, am I going to come out and perform with an APC on like a controller, or am I going to, like, you know, DJ, whatever. So he asked me to come out and play, and in my head I was sort of like, we had a conversation about like some sort of funky Brazilian stuff that I was working on, kind of what I was talking about before we did the last song. It's like project that's been sort of going in the background. And in my head I was thinking like, okay, I'm going to go out and do like a Maxwell Cutty set and, you know, some like rock and house music. And so I talked to him a few days before the show, and he was like, yeah, so I got you booked on the funk stage. And I'm like, oh, shit, I did say that was something I was ready to do. And, like, I guess I could be. Like, all right, yeah, fuck it, let's make this work. Like, we'll figure it out. And so that was about 3 days before the set. And I had an hour set slot. And I pulled up right after I talked to him on the phone, I pulled up all of the sort of stuff that I had that I thought would fit kind of neatly in that vein of what I wanted to represent around like some of this Brazilian inspired kind of disco funk sort of stuff. And I had about 25 minutes of music.
Oh, wow. So you had 35 to pack together
I did.
in 3 days.
Yes. So I wrote a dozen new songs over the course of the next 3 days. Mostly wrote is an overstatement. Mostly they were remixes, flips, sort of the stuff I had been doing, like sampling and referencing some of the Brazilian music, predominantly from like the 1970s, that kind of like Brazil disco funk kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I just sort of like, I went to my wife and was like, hey, I'm going to kind of just be in the studio for the next like 3 days. Like, this is what the deal is. And she's like, yeah, do what you got to do, So over the course of like, I don't know, anywhere between like 12 to 16, 17 hours a day, I just sat here and produced. And, in the next 2.5 days, another 35 or so minutes of music. And it kind of got down to the wire where it was the morning of the show. And I still needed to pad out some time. Everything was sort of stretched to its limit and was like, fuck, I need another track. And so I opened up my sort of session where I had my like set materials laid out and ended up just sort of producing this song in the set. It doesn't even have its own Ableton session. It's just sort of like baked, like I just sort of composed it right into the set, Ableton set. And I ended up really liking it, and it was, it's not super complicated, but it's got some tasty percussion and like some interesting sounding stuff, and it kind of leans more towards that really chilled out kind of soulful side of the Bailey sound. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was sort of a nice complement to stuff like Choose One and that sort of vein of the set. So just written right into the set. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't exist anywhere else than that. I don't know that it ever will or ever see the light of day, but it felt like a fun little thing to share today.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. I love the rhythmic components of this song. And it brought me into the question, are there any specific drum sounds you enjoy working with more than others? Like perhaps bongos? Am I mixing the two together?
Congas.
Congo is a country.
Congo is a country. Never been.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of depends. Like in this sort of vein, like I fucking love Brazilian percussion. It's just like the pandero is like a sort of hybrid, like kind of tambourine with a drum head over it. That's got a really nice both percussive and kind of jingly quality to it. You know, obviously a multitude of shakers. There's a shaker you find in Brazil called a caxixe, which is the one that you hold while you play the berimbau, which is that sort of capoeira instrument. So I like that a lot. And then there's, you know, just sort of the myriad of samba percussion instruments. Like the repenique is like this nice high drum, and it's got a kind of like snare drum line sort of quality to it. So I really like that for the fills. And then, you know, I find that like one of the cool things about Brazilian percussion, a lot of Latin percussion, but Brazilian percussion in particular, is that even amongst the same sort of patterns, you get like really specific qualities around different tonalities of wood blocks, for example. Like in both this one and in Choose One, there's a sort of heavy emphasis on some of these like block and clave sounds. And I really like the way that they sort of cut through a mix, and that you can sort of create this like sort of bouncy lurchingness amidst a like sort of complicated combination of sounds, but it sort of like drives the beat in a cool way. Mm-hmm. So I would say those kind of percussion elements, the claves, the wood blocks, and the shakers.
Nice. There's I was curious about the vocal sound. I don't even know if it's a vocals that is in this song, but it sounds like a bup, you know?
Oh yeah, bop, bop. So yeah.
So is that a vocal sample?
It's a sample. Okay. It's a chop of a just a little snippet of a vocal. So that's a thing that you find a lot in baile funk music, is they do these like, it's almost like, you know, like Brazilian, like chopped and screwed type shit, where like they'll take these vocal samples and they'll cut them up and use them as percussion. And you get a lot of those like, type stuff. And like sometimes they're like either pitched way up, type of shit, or like pitched way down. And so that's something that's very like, it's a hallmark of the baile funk style. So that's me kind of doing like a little callback to the influence, you know, because especially in this track, like there's a lot of percussion in there, but that percussion definitely leans more towards like traditional, more like samba style percussion that you would find in, you know, like samba and bossa, that kind of Brazilian music. That honestly, that kind of percussion isn't super prevalent in the baile funk stuff. It is a much more contemporary sort of sound. But so bringing in some of those elements, like those little vocal chops and stuff like that, I think is sort of like, you know, my way of kind of making a nod to the old plus new kind of thing, which is kind of what I'm doing in the style of remixing in this whole greater, you know, project.
Yeah. So. Well, I love the song, and hopefully it does see the light of day, but if not, saw the light of day here, so listen to it. The drony nature of the song really, you know, made my ears perk up. It almost felt like, you know, dreamlike in the style of the song. But I just wanted to say, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I like me some chill dance stuff, you know, where it's a little sedated, you know, I guess would be a good way to put it.
So, you know, I mentioned earlier that growing up, my parents played a lot of reggae music around the house. And one of the things that I got really into when I was younger, teenager, was dub reggae, you know, and like, you know, Scientist, King Tubby, Prince Jammy, like all of those guys, you know, obviously Lee Perry. And one of the things that I always really loved about dub music was not only the sort of like psychedelic, spacey, explorative nature of it, but also like the role of the engineer almost as a musician in the group, right? Because they're essentially like remixing, but they're doing it through the use of effects and studio tools and sort of like rearranging things on the fly. And to me, a lot of that dub music has this very like ethereal kind of dreamlike quality to it, where it's not afraid of this like swirliness and like heavy on the effects and kind of like, like you said, sort of sedated at times. And so that's always something that I've sort of carried into my producing and mixing style as well, is, swirly and kind of spacey, psychedelic kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so, this is sort of like, it is a natural extension of that in this kind of dance music for me.
That makes sense. I remembered when I was in high school and I was at Bumbershoot in Seattle, and I just happened to take some mushrooms with some friends, and then we stumbled on a dub show, and it was a very pivotal moment in my life for music, and I was just like, holy shit, what is this? Like, I heard reggae before, but what is happening right now? Like, I wasn't sure if it was the mushrooms. I mean, obviously the mushrooms definitely helped, but it was one of those, I was like, who is this band? I need to buy all of their stuff. Like, it's just, I had a fantastic moment, but I've always, and then I discovered King Tubby and Scratch Perry and stuff like that all afterward, and just thoroughly, and have always enjoyed, that style of genre. So that's one of the reasons I like this one quite a bit. But, well, I was going to ask you about, your favorite instruments, but that you like working with, but it seems like you have kind of talked about that in the percussive sense, but what about harmonically? Like, do you have any instruments that you enjoy working with more so than others? I mean,
yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like many people who work in the realm of producing either hip hop or soul music, I am an absolute sucker for the Fender Rhodes. Anything. It's
a beautiful sounding instrument.
Yeah, anything that has that sort of like rich thickness to it. I tend to utilize a lot of like pads and kind of like swirly keyboard sounds that, to me are nostalgic in that kind of like, tremoloed kind of like panning around Rhodes sound that, is so typical of earlier like 90s R&B music and stuff. I guess like more later R&B, 90s R&B. But so yeah, like stuff that has that kind of swirly quality, like harmonically speaking, I'm a really big fan of like dense clustered chordal harmonies, where it's like, oh, we might be playing like a major 7, 9, 11, but we're going to bring the 9 and the 11 down to be in the middle of the chord and get a lot of things that are like, a whole step away from each other or a half step away from each other. You get these tight clustered chords that have a lot of like tension to them. And so I find that like instruments like the Rhodes or sort of like those sort of rich keyboard sounds really like make that kind of harmony sound like emotionally resonant for me. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of, maybe even to a fault, fucking pads and like big open chord structures. Other than that, bass, I'm a bass player, love writing bass lines. Bass lines play a very prominent role in my work for sure.
It's the driving force of essentially all music. I mean,
yeah, I mean, in many ways it is, and in many eras of music for sure. And, I tend to write bass lines from a very melodic perspective, as a bass player. So a lot of the music that I put out, the bass is the sort of like leader of the harmony and the leader of the show, and tends to sort of noodle around in a more melodic way than, maybe bass lines sometimes are presented. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that and good old swirly chords.
I found that when I looked back on like all the classic rock music that I listened to as a kid and gravitated towards, I always, upon reflection, I found that I have an affinity for a more complex or melodic bass style, as opposed to just the very, because in a lot of rock music, you can have essentially very basic bass. And that for some reason, before I understood how to articulate it or anything like that, or even really knew what I was looking for, there were things that, pushed me away from those like the low end simplicities, you know what I mean? And even nowadays, when I go back and like, you know, I like jazz music, and I'll listen to it periodically, but I find myself having a hard time, especially recently. I don't know exactly why this happened, but like walking bass lines, just doom, 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 doom. You know, just like for some reason, whatever that is, it's just like it's too simple for me. I need it to be more melodically.
Walking bass lines too simple.
Something about
like
it. I don't know.
Like the most. It's like the most improvisational like manifestation of bass playing in so many ways. I mean, I get what you're saying though. You know.
Yeah.
In some regards, I would honestly say that like playing jazz bass is one of the absolute funnest things for me as an instrumentalist, because you know when you're walking a bass line, like you've got chord changes, but that's it. There's no like bass line in jazz music. You know, it's not like there's a set of notes that you're playing. It's like you're improvising the whole time.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you have a roadmap, so to speak, but like it is truly like taking almost like taking a solo for an entire song. I mean, obviously you're not trying to like be that focus of attention, and you got to like listen to the people you're playing with, but yeah, that like improvisational nature of it is so much fun. I mean, in stark contrast to something like reggae music, where it's like the bass line is such an important part, not to say that it's not important in jazz music, but like, you know, it's such a like leader of the band that I also love playing reggae music because the bass lines are not, because it's very repetitive and it's more of like a pocket groove kind of thing. But yeah, man, walking bass lines, that shit's fun as hell.
I mean, in my small stint as a funk bass player, I definitely would try some of that stuff out. But in, you know, funk, it's a lot, I feel like, easier. You know, you have like shorter bursts of you know, stuff that you're tuning into. But I mean,
it's like it's the middle ground between the like rock bass and, you know, jazz bass, essentially.
Yeah. I do love me some bass lines, though.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Riddle, as I see you all the time, it was good having you on the other side of this and getting to ask you some questions about your music and everything. But you should tell the listening audience, you know, where they can experience the plethora of, you know, music that you put out, because you're one of the more prolific people that I've, you know, had an opportunity of hanging out with. So
thank you.
Yep.
So I'm going to try to make this as least complicated of an answer as possible. So quick rundown. If you want my sort of hip hop, soul, R&B, me producing for other people, that's Riddle, RIDL. There'll be, you know, a link to my Linktree or something down below. House music, maxwellcutty. Also put a link for that. And then, you know, I sort of gather all of my things together under the umbrella of a sort of entity. It's not really a label, but under the entity called Space Mother. So you can find much of my music on Bandcamp at thespacemother.bandcamp.com. You can also find a lot of the Maxwell Cutty stuff, maxwellcutty.bandcamp.com. And then, you know, Instagram, though I hate Instagram.
It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, I should probably spend more time with it, but it just, it's a soul-sucking endeavor. So, but you can find me there, you know, at Riddle Music, RIDL Music, at Maxwell Cutty. Yeah, that's it. And here on Below the Noise all the time.
Well, thank y'all for tuning in. And if you have any recommendations, suggestions on artists that you think that we should interview, spotlight, have come through the studio, do a little jam sesh, etc., you know, feel free to shoot us an email, drop a, you know, comment in the comment section, anything. But yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.